All right, let's do a brand new basketball show getting ready for week 14. It's a week where Alabama doesn't play in the midweek, doesn't play until the weekend when they travel to Arkansas. For Auburn, it's two pretty interesting games, two of them at home at Neville Arena for Auburn after going 5-0 on SEC road games. That's Taylor Korn. She'll be down at Auburn a couple of times this week. I'm Jim Dunaway, and this is the basketball show. Little T, man, here we go. Getting into the first full February week of the basketball schedule. We have a lot of great questions to talk about. But first, rearview mirror, what did you think of Auburn's big win at Ole Miss?
I was very impressed. That was a game that I think both of us were a little concerned about at the end of last week, just because Ole Miss is a talented basketball team. Winning on the road, not easy. And I've just had a feel like a loss is coming. That's what my keeps running through my head is eventually this team's going to drop a game, and they just haven't done it yet. But I was very impressed with that win, and I mean, the Auburn Tigers are just rolling right now.
Yeah, blew my mind that they won the way they won by scoring 92 points, 41 in the first half, which I thought was high, and then they go 51 in the second half. Ball movement on the perimeter to get the open three. We talked about, Tahad and Miles and Chad Baker Mazara hitting a really good percentage from three. It all came from the ball movement from me, getting them really good looks from three. So hats off to Auburn's offense. For Alabama, their win over Georgia, I will say this. Alabama's big wins, so many of them have come on the road. And then when they've come home to play at Coleman Coliseum after a big road win, they sort of played flat, won the game, but played sort of flat at home, won the game except against Ole Miss. So I was really happy to see them come out. They didn't play an A-plus game, but they came out and beat the crap out of Georgia, and they played really good. And for a brief moment of time, I thought they played their best basketball of the year. So I was really happy to see Alabama come off a big road win and actually play good at home for a change.
Yeah, and something that you said about them seeming to struggle a little bit returning to Coleman Coliseum after road games. I think something that's important that doesn't get talked about a ton is the value that comes with winning, running away like they did yesterday when you're not playing your A plus game. They had sparks where they looked really, really good, but it's also important to be able to find success when everything might not be going your way, when your big time players might not be playing their best game. So I do think that there's a lot of value in figuring out how to win when shots aren't falling, when things aren't going your way, when you're not playing your best basketball.
To your point, 13 first half turnovers, never the way you want to do that, especially at home. That's one of our questions coming up. We'll get to your questions right now. Don't forget, our show always brought to you by roback.com. Promo code TNR20 gets you 20% off. It helps little T and I out. Usually, if you guys buy a lot, we'll get something free. But we also buy some stuff as well. Roback as well. Roback.com. Promo code TNR20 gets you 20% off. Taylor has taken all your questions and sort of put them into these categories. So we know names with these. I'm just going to bulk these questions sort of in a grouping. And the first three are about the SEC race in Auburn and Alabama together. Of course, we're leading up to that February 15th game. So I'll start with this question, and then we'll get to how many wins does the SEC champion end up having? How many losses do you think Auburn and Alabama end up having? Auburn and Alabama are 1-2. So we'll sort of answer all three of those questions tied into one, but let's break them down specifically. The first one is, how tight will this race be? How many SEC losses for Auburn? How many losses for Alabama? And the SEC champion, we used to say it'd be 13-5. What do we think it is now? So let's go with that one first. At the beginning of the year, we were asked, and we talked about it on the next round. You and I talked about it here on the basketball show, that we thought maybe 14-4 could be really tough. 13-5 would win the SEC regular season champion. We're into this now. I'm going to say this, and you may say, Jim, you're trying to landmine Auburn. But at some point, I've got to say good things about Auburn because they're the best team in the country right now. 13-5 doesn't seem possible anymore for Auburn. 14-4 for me, which is what I thought a really good team would have to win the SEC, is getting where I can't even see them losing 4 games right now. You're talking about they're going to lose one. Okay, they're going to lose one. They're going to lose two, I'll say. But I'm starting to have a hard time imagining they're going to lose three. So I'm going to say the SEC champion now. My projection's at 16-2. It's changed a lot from 13-5. 16-2 is with no name beside it. I'm not going to say who I think it is, but I think the SEC champion is 16-2. What say you, Taylor Corn?
I went a little more conservative and I said 15-3. I don't think that anyone thought any team would be without a loss, 8 or 9, depending on what team you're looking at through that many games. I mean, we're about halfway through conference play, and I think that everyone thought that every single team in the conference would have at least one loss at this point. So obviously that changes the way that you look at things. And so I think 15-3, I think that I could see 15-3. I mean, I 16-2 wouldn't surprise me. But going back to the 13-5, Auburn and Alabama are obviously Alabama's the only team with one loss. Everyone else has two or more, besides Auburn, who's yet to lose. But I can't see either of those two teams getting to 13-5. I think that 15-3 is a safe guess.
Okay, that gets us to the next question from our audience, and this is always the mailbag version of this. How many SEC losses does Auburn have? How many SEC losses does Alabama have? Let's go Auburn first. We're down to where I can read the schedule to you the rest of the way because there's that few games left. 2 home games this week, as I said, Oklahoma and Florida, at Vandy, at Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Ole Miss, all at home, at Kentucky, at A&M, home to Alabama. So if I ask you right now, current number is 0. I'll say that again. 0, the hero. That's the loss column. How many losses does Auburn have? You answer it first.
This is so challenging. This is so challenging, and kind of backpedaling to the prediction of how many losses or what the record of the regular season champion will be. I think a lot of this depends on some of these trap, quote unquote, trap games. Auburn hasn't gotten caught by one yet. I'll tell you this, the most concerning games for me remaining on Auburn's schedule, I think that Florida will be a tricky game. It's at home, so that's obviously an advantage, but I think that that will be a tricky game at Alabama. That's the one that I can see them most likely dropping. At Kentucky, at Texas A&M. So they do have a decent number of home games remaining, which will be beneficial. They played a lot of road games so far. I think 5 of their first 8 have been on the road. So they've proven that they can win on the road. I'll say they end the season.
You're
Oh
gonna
my
say what
gosh.
you're gonna say what I said. You're gonna say 16-2, but you don't want to say 16-2.
I don't, because I'm just like, how is that possible? Because
Yeah.
this
I
conference
mean,
is so competitive.
I don't want to put words in your mouth. Were you going to say 18-0 or 17-1?
No, because I mean, but then again, it's like this team. Nothing would surprise me with this team because they every before the Ole Miss game, I'm like, ooh, this one could be tricky. Nope. I mean, they continue to win. I'll say 16-2.
Mm. So you agree with those Jimmy Landmine, 16-2.
I
That's
think. I mean, I think so.
yeah. Because here we go. Florida, even though it's at home, at Alabama, at Kentucky, at A&M, and I will throw it back the other way. Alabama at home. Those are 5 games that on a given night you could lose those games.
Yep.
I'm going to say, all right, those 5, and I mean, 16-2, you could lose 2 of those 5, be 3-2 of those 5 games, and you're still 16-2. That's why I went 16-2. I don't think Oklahoma will be a challenge. I don't think at Vandy will be a challenge. All due respect to what John Calipari in Arkansas did on Saturday night at
Yeah.
Kentucky, I don't think they'll be a challenge. Georgia, no way. Ole Miss coming back to Neville after what you did to them there in Oxford. So 10 games left. I think 5 of them are in the caution category. I'll just say you go 3-2 in those. That gets you to 16-2. Let's do Alabama now. Alabama's got 1 loss. So already 1 loss. Where does Alabama end up? and I can read that schedule to you because we have so few games left. Next two are tricky. They're on the road at Arkansas, at Texas, home to Auburn, at Missouri, then Kentucky and Mississippi State at home, at Tennessee, Florida at home, and at Auburn. I mean, there's a stretch of games there that are really, really, really tough games. For me, I'm going to say, and we'll talk about how the SEC race works in our next question. But obviously, the two Auburn games, Florida at home, at Tennessee, and Kentucky and Mississippi State at home, those are still, and at Missouri. I think Alabama, I could see them possibly losing any of the games left. But I'm going to paint them in at losing only three of them. I'm going to go 14-4 with Alabama.
Yeah, I think I'm along the same lines. I mean, I'm not concerned about Arkansas, or I think that it's going to be very interesting to see how Arkansas responds because Ole Miss, like you said earlier, that's Alabama's only conference loss, and they kind of spiraled after they beat Alabama. So I'm interested to see how this Arkansas team, will it give them confidence or could they take a turn like Ole Miss did after a massive road win and crumble? Not too concerned about that. I mean, I think, yeah, Kentucky, they've proven that they beat Kentucky on the road in a very, very hostile environment. Not easy to win at Kentucky. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they only lost two more.
Yeah, to get to 15-3.
Yeah.
So that gets to the other question was how tight will this race be? So I'm going to paint a scenario that Alabama wins the SEC championship. And for
Okay.
that to happen, I say this has to happen. Alabama has to survive the lead up to the big Auburn game coming up February 15th. That's two road games at Arkansas. And I think all of you guys watching, men and women, will agree that Arkansas, and it's easy to say after they win at Rupp Arena, but they're better now that Boogie Fland is out hurt. For whatever reason, the guys that are left have found a little chemistry, so they're more dangerous. But Alabama at Arkansas at Texas, you got to win both of those if you're going to stay in the SEC championship race. You got to win both of those, and then here comes Auburn to town. So you've survived the two road games before Auburn with all the distractions that are out there possible. So here comes Auburn unbeaten, and you've only got one loss. And then if you're going to win the SEC regular season championship, you got to win the first one. You got to
Yeah.
win the first one at Coleman Coliseum. All right. And then you're at Missouri, Kentucky, Mississippi State, at Tennessee, Florida, Auburn. I'm not saying you got to win all of those, but you got to survive this Arkansas, Texas road trip, then home game to Auburn and win that one. And then we got a race at that point. We got a race at that point. But if you stumble in these two games leading into Auburn and then lose to Auburn, now it's a 3-game gap and this thing is over with, in my opinion. So if Alabama's going to be SEC regular season champion, which I think they still could do,
Yes.
they got to survive these two road games, Arkansas and Texas, and then beat Auburn in the first meeting. That'll even everybody up, and then you battle your ass off down the stretch there, and then you got a chance. That's how tight the race could be. But there is a potential by the time we get to that final game of the year at Neville Arena that Auburn has a 2-game gap, and that game will mean nothing but maybe for seeding for Alabama in the NCAA tournament.
I thought you were going to end your answer with what I was going to say. I was going to say I wouldn't be surprised if that final SEC game for these two teams in Auburn decided the regular season champion. That wouldn't surprise me one bit.
I mean, it would shock me, but I really believe by the time we get there, Auburn will have a 2-game lead in the league. Maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe that game will be of value. And again, for that to happen, I believe Alabama has to survive Arkansas, Texas, and win that first game against Auburn. And then it's game on. Then it's
Yeah.
game on at that point. Then it's like, okay, here we go. Now we got a race. Now we got a race. Now we got something good. Because you have to admit, Auburn's stealing all the headlines right now.
Stealing? What do you mean stealing?
Well, I mean, you guys get all the headlines. Everybody, especially this show, all this show ever does is talk about Auburn, 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 Auburn.
I mean, They're the best team in the country. I think they deserve the headlines.
Yeah, I'm just saying I mean, Auburn. It's very dark in the shadows over there in Tuscaloosa right
It
now.
no, no one is overly like you.
Yeah, well,
I
don't let
can feel you stirring, you just
poor
churning.
poor
Stir the pot.
poor
Stir
poor
the
old
pot.
Alabama. Poor old
Yeah, poor
Alabama.
Alabama. No one's talking
Yeah.
about the number 4 team in the country, Alabama. Poor
Let's see.
you.
Poor old
Woe
Alabama.
is me.
Let's see what Alabama can do. Okay, a couple
Yeah.
of questions from our audience about Alabama, and then we got a final four question that we got in a post game that Taylor's done some research on Auburn's Final Four team and this current Auburn team. That in a second. But first, one of our viewers asked about Mo Diabate. Mo Diabate was at one point considered the X factor. Do we still consider him the X factor? And if not, who is the X factor? I want you to tell me who you think the X factor is now, because I think we're going to agree on this, though we don't do any pre-show prep on this. I don't think Mo Diabate is the X factor anymore. I think he's a known quantity. He's a known quality, and he's the known defensive guru that comes off the bench. I think you know what you're going to get every game from Mo D this year, and I think you got to find another X factor or two X factors, because I think Mo D is no longer that. Mo D is a given. X is usually, if I remember my high school algebra, you had to figure out a problem to figure out what X was. We know what
Yeah.
X is when it comes to Mo D. He is no longer X. We got to go to Y and Z with somebody else, because Mo D is a known factor.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that he's become a constant. It's not like he'll have a breakout game, then kind of drop off for a game or two. He's
That's that
been very
Vestavia.
consistent.
That's that Vestavia vocabulary. The word I was looking for was constant, and I could never get there. And you pulled that out instantly. He's the constant. That's what I
That's
was
what I'm
looking
here
for.
for. That's
There
what I'm
you
here
go.
for. But yeah, I think that he's become very consistent and he's a guy that they've been able to rely on. And I have talked about him a lot and I have praised him a lot, but I'm going back to Chris Youngblood as the X factor because he's someone that's flourishing right now. They were good. Alabama was good before he started to break out, but I think that he's what pushes them over the edge. He has the ability to make this team extremely, extremely tough to beat. They were hard to beat before, but he pushes them over the edge, especially with Latrell Wrightsell being out. He's really filled that gap that was left after Latrell's season-ending injury. So I think that he's kind of what pushes Alabama over the edge, and he's starting to break. I think that he's the X factor right now. He's the guy that's starting to break out right now and proving to be very, very, very valuable to this team.
Um, he, my X factor answer, T, is going to be why I think Alabama can still win a championship, or maybe go back to a Final Four or win a national championship. Here's my X factor for Alabama, is the fact that they have so many players who are not playing up to their potential yet. And I think that's the X factor for this team. Mo D's become a known factor. Chris Youngblood, I think, has become a known factor. He is becoming almost the offensive threat that when you need a big bucket, it's almost not Mark Sears anymore. It's almost Chris Youngblood. He's going to hit the big bucket for you. Here's what the X factor, I think, for Alabama, and why this team could still be scary good down the stretch. My X factor right now is LeBaron Philon, and he may be the most qualified NBA talent on the team. But all of a sudden, he's not contributing the same. Maybe it's the lower leg injury. Maybe it's the freshman wall. But for whatever reason, what we had from Agent Zero early on hasn't been the same lately. And I think there is still, as we get to the games that matter the most, still another gear for LeBaron Philon to contribute with this team. The same from Darian Reed and Jaron Stevenson. Jaron took two shots on Saturday. He hit them both. My goodness, if he comes back, oh, there we go. We got balloons going. My goodness,
Celebration.
yeah, celebration. So if he comes back and all of a sudden he is an offensive threat to go with his defense, and then Darian Reed, who's missed a big chunk of games, he comes back. He's a McDonald's All-American, and if he comes back and he has the ability to contribute like he was for a brief moment early on, there are so many of these Alabama players who aren't right there yet, who aren't playing their best basketball. That's why I still think this team can be scary good down the stretch. So the X factor for me is LeBaron Philon and these other guys who still aren't playing their A game yet. I don't want to be a homer here, but I think this Alabama team is where they are right now as a one seed nationally, still probably number two overall on Lenardi's list or somewhere on the one line for sure. Behind Auburn, yes, but I think this team is nowhere close to playing their best basketball yet and hasn't all season long. I like what's possible down the stretch here. How do you fix the turnovers was another question. That's a problem for Alabama. 13 the first half, 20 in the game against Georgia. It was a disaster in the loss to Ole Miss, the only SEC loss. How do you fix the turnover problem? You're the coach. What do you do?
I mean, I think I don't know what in terms of I went back first off, let me start from the beginning. I went back and looked at Alabama's losses. I looked at the number of turnovers that they had in their three losses this season. They only had 8 to Purdue.
That's
So,
right.
not bad. 15, they had 15 turnovers in their loss to Oregon and 21 in their loss to Ole Miss. Yes, and this question is coming, on the heels of the Georgia game where they did have 20, didn't really seem to impact them. I believe that Georgia only had 9 points off turnovers, if I remember that correctly.
Yeah.
So in terms of scoring margin, their turnovers didn't lead to a ton of points, but you can't bank on that happening down the stretch, like the question's asking, what needs to happen to make a strong run in March. I mean, just being careful with the basketball. I don't know if it's the fast pace. Their tempo, they play with at a very high pace, fast pace. And, when you're trying to do anything quickly, think about just being at your house, like you're trying to cook dinner super quickly. You're more likely to spill, you're more likely to knock something over. And so, I mean, I think that their pace of play, which is something that makes them a great team, it makes them hard to beat, could also be linked to a little bit of, I don't want to call it sloppy play, but when you're moving quickly, you're more prone, to fumble the
Yeah.
ball a little bit.
But when I watch them, little T, sometimes it seems like they try to make the most difficult pass possible.
Right. Yeah.
Instead of throwing it here, they try to throw it there, and it
Yeah.
becomes why? Oh, okay, let me put it through a needle,
Yeah. Thread. Let me
a
thread
thread through the needle here between three defenders, and make this perfect pass. When let's just kick it over here, just an easy pass. And a lot of these seem to come occasionally, not to call names, but Mark will turn it over. Mark Sears will turn it over occasionally on that drive to the basket that he's so good at, and he gets caught up in the air. Grant does this occasionally too. And then, oh, you're up the air. You're not going to get a shot off, it doesn't look like. So now you're going to throw it to somebody. And some of the mistakes seem to happen there. So I think that is a little bit of what you're saying, product of the way they play the game. But it was a major. I know it wasn't a factor. 20 turnovers against Georgia because Georgia on the road just not a great basketball team. They're a tournament team, but not a great basketball team, not on Alabama's level. But it cost them in the Ole Miss game, and it
Yeah.
cost them in the Oregon game, and those turnovers will cost you in some of the Tennessee game up there. Either one of the Auburn games, if you're sloppy and you give extra possessions to Auburn, it'll cost you. So they do have to clean that up. Speaking of Auburn, they've been to the Final Four. Alabama went last year. Auburn went there first. What was that, 2019?
Yes.
2019. So that 2019 team, this point in the year, we asked you stat wise to look it up for me, what that team looked like right now and what this team looked like. And because we were asked to compare this team in the post game Saturday to that team that went to the Final Four. And I said, let's do a little research and we'll answer it in this one. And I said, Taylor, you do it. I'll give you homework. And I think in my memory, we're going to find out that at this point in the season, that Auburn team wasn't that good. This Auburn team a lot better than that Auburn team. Does my memory serve me right?
It does. And I wasn't super surprised by this just because I mean, we've seen tweets, we've seen in game notes. This Auburn basketball team, the 24-25 team, has been on a historic run in terms of efficiency numbers. They're putting up historic numbers in the landscape of college basketball in terms of these these websites that you can look at that have been tracking this for, 10, 15 years. So that didn't really surprise me a ton because I was like, we're talking about their numbers being record breaking in the entire landscape of college basketball. They've got to be they've got to be better. So I'll start running through, I guess, the major box score stats.
Okay.
This team is averaging 84.5 points a game. The 2018-2019 team was averaging 79.4. So there's about a 5-point difference there. The 24-25 team is currently shooting 48.6% from the field and 37.7% from three. 2018-2019 team was shooting 44.9% from the field, 37.6% from three. So very similar numbers there, almost exactly the same from three. They're shooting free throws better, 74.5% right now, 71% in 2018-2019. And then I'll read their KenPom adjusted offensive efficiency numbers, adjusted defensive deficiency numbers, and they are currently sitting at their adjusted offensive efficiency right now is 130.3. In 2018-2019 it was 120.9. So they've got a
Yeah.
10 their yeah,
Big
10
difference.
point margin there. And then defensive efficiency, not a huge gap there. It's currently 93.9. It was 95.9. So a little bit better, nothing crazy. It's the offense is where I think you're seeing, a big jump. And that again is not surprising because something that has been, I mean, I know that there were good guards, there were very productive offensive players on that Final Four team, but if you're looking in the recent history, which I feel like that's kind of contradicting, but the past few years, something that Auburn has lacked is is inconsistent guard play. They haven't had, the guys that they can rely on night in and night out at the guard position. It's just been something that hasn't really been there. And they have that this year. They have that in Chad. They have that in Miles. They have that in Tahad. They have that in Denver. Like they have guys that are consistently productive offensively. So it's crazy, but I'm not super shocked by it.
Yeah. And I agree with you on that. Bryce Brown was he and Jared Harper were the guys back then.
Mm-hmm.
They were your guards, and they were the guys that got out there and got after it. And you're exactly right. They were really good. Jared Harper was a hard cover, and Bryce Brown could shoot the lights out at times. But this guard group puts them to shame. You had Chuma, you had Macklemore, who was unbelievable on that team. Um, I'm just looking at guys on that roster that sort of still pop with me. Samir Darty, I don't know if people remember him.
Yep.
Austin Wiley, of course, was a fierce 6'11" guy. But I just to me that the guards were really good. Kiki was tremendous as a sophomore. Macklemore was the glue guy. Um, this team is better than that team, but that's March Madness. I think
Yeah.
Jabari and Kessler's team was better than that team. They got a one seed and they just didn't get there in the tournament. And like I got invited out of town today for a beach trip that we got invited Maggie and I to go on this beach trip. Happens to be Final Four weekend, and I had to say no. I said I can't. We can't go because Maggie can go. I can't go. And they're like,
Yeah.
why? And I said, because Auburn or Alabama or both could be in the Final Four. I'm not going to go ahead and pay for, a condo at the beach
Right.
and a house at the beach and then not be able to go.
Yeah.
So but as soon as I do that, they'll get knocked out in the 32 or 16 and
Oh,
I'll be
geez.
I'll be, staying at some campground trying to squeeze into a golf game on a beach trip or something. But this team is better on paper than that Final Four team. This Alabama team better on paper than last year's Alabama Final Four team. Just hope they can stick the landing. 1 week ahead. That includes two games for Auburn at home, Oklahoma on Tuesday. Little T, maybe me. Well, maybe we're both down there on Tuesday. Oklahoma and Auburn. It's an 8 o'clock SEC network game. And then on Saturday, Alabama's at Arkansas. Florida is at Auburn. The Alabama Arkansas game's a night game, 7 o'clock. Florida and Auburn's 3 o'clock in the afternoon down at Neville. If you're looking for big games in the SEC, huge one on Tuesday night. Kentucky coming off a home loss, needing now a road win at Ole Miss. And Ole Miss, I think, has lost 4 or 5 or something like that. Both those teams are really good. They both need a win on Tuesday night. That'll be really big. And then Arkansas plays at Texas after winning at Kentucky. Can Arkansas get back into the NCAA tournament conversation? It would start with a win at Texas to back up that win at Kentucky. That's ahead in the SEC. We'll send out a little bit later on this week. Just check us at Next Round Live. You'll see a little TV sheet of some of the bigger games we pull out for you every week. And Little T, you'll have everything for us at Next Round Live, right?
Of course, of course. I'll have some updated odds for anything that there's odds for on the internet. I know that our audience finds those very interesting.
Yeah,
So just you never know what you're going to get. So make
yeah.
sure you're following the next round on all of the social media platforms, and we're going to keep you up to date on what's going on.
Yeah, at Next Round Live, that's on Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, the best stuff. And we will get to some college football news tomorrow at 9 a.m. or Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. But it's basketball season for Little T, and this is the basketball show where we only talk basketball. And we will be back with you Tuesday night after the Oklahoma Auburn game with a live post game reaction. For Little T, I'm Big J, and we'll see you soon.